This scary story was shared anonymously on Reddit, so let's jump right into it. It was about 2 in the morning, and I had just gotten off my shift working security at a mall. It was a Friday, and obviously I was tired, but on my way home, I passed this old abandoned mosque that was built by the Ottoman Empire before World War I. It's in pretty rough shape, and graffiti covered most of the walls both inside and out. And I remember thinking that it would be a great place to hide if you were trying to avoid the cops or something. It always looked like no one had been inside for a long time because all of the windows were boarded up and the doors were always closed, locked and bolted from the outside. Well, as I was walking past it, the door was actually open, which was strange because I could have sworn that they were bolted from the outside last time I walked by. Anyway, I figured, why not? I can use a nap and this place looks pretty safe. If anyone comes in, they'd probably just ask me what I'm doing here and then leave me alone. So I walked in and went to sleep. About 30 minutes later, I woke up, and I don't know if it was just my imagination, but I could have sworn I heard someone else move around in the back of the building. Now, normally, if I saw anyone else there, I wouldn't really think anything of it because I get pretty paranoid anyway. But I decided to stay where I was until I got home. About half an hour after that, I started hearing noises again. This time, it sounded like footsteps coming closer and I started to freak out a bit. I didn't want to run because I thought whoever was making the noise might have been whatever killed the previous imam. At least he had the decency to quit while he was ahead instead of dying in the line of duty like my shift. I sat there listening to these footsteps getting closer and closer until they stopped about 2 meters away from me. Then I heard what sounded like a man clear his throat. And then he said very quietly, almost to himself, "Alhamdulillah, irbiyadi wa la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah." It was the first verse of Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran. Now, to put things into perspective, when I was younger, I used to go to this mosque sometimes with my dad. We went there at least 3 times a week, and I attended Sunday school there every Sunday. My Arabic isn't perfect, but I can read it fairly well and I've memorized most of the Quran. However, I haven't prayed in a long time. And anyway, I was just sitting there listening to this guy in front of me slowly recite the Quran. But what was strange is that every time he recited a word, I could recite the same word at the same time. And at first I didn't think much of it, because sometimes I just randomly recite stuff from the Quran while I'm doing other things. But then he reached the end of Al-Fatiha, and he started into the second verse of the Quran. And I still found myself saying the exact same words at the same time. That's when I realized that I wasn't imagining any of this. Whoever was there with me was somehow putting these thoughts into my head. At first I tried to ignore it, and I focused on clearing my mind. But the words kept coming, and before I knew it, I was standing up reciting the entire Quran with this other guy. And then, as I stood up, I finally took notice of my surroundings. The room I was in was maybe 6 by 6 meters, and in front of me was a square room that had been carved into the wall. In front of that was another smaller room, basically a niche or a mihrab, which is usually where the imam stands to lead prayers. And behind that niche were 4 pillars, and behind the pillars was a stairway leading to a balcony. What freaked me out was that the man who was reciting the Quran with me was in that niche and he was facing me the whole time. But the thing was, he wasn't actually there. He was just a shadow. And all around me, the shadows of people started appearing behind the pillars. They were standing in rows, just like during prayer time. And they were all whispering along with me as I recited the Quran. So now I'm panicked, and I'm backing away from the mihrab. And that's when I noticed that the guy in the mihrab had a face and I could see his eyes. That's when I started running for the door, praying that this nightmare would end soon. The problem was that the door that had been open when I came in was now closed and locked. And then the scariest part happened. The guy stepped out of the mihrab and he started walking toward me. Still whispering the Quran, he came up to the door and pushed it open with ease and then turned around to look at me. At this point, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke down and started crying, and I asked him to help me, but all he did was smile and keep reciting the Quran. Then he started walking toward me, and as he got closer, I could see more and more details on his robe. It was an imam's robe, and it was torn in several places. Then he stopped about 1 meter away from me and finally stopped reciting. But even in the darkness, I could see that he was staring at me with a wild look on his face. And as I stared back at him, he whispered in a raspy voice, "Finally, you are here." That's when I realized that the only way out of the situation was to play along. So I forced myself to calm down, and I asked him what he meant. But instead of answering, he turned around and walked toward the door. He paused for a moment and then shouted, "As salam alaikum." And I responded, "Wa alaikum as salam." He then turned back to look at me and gestured for me to follow him. I hesitated for a moment, but ultimately I followed him, and we walked in silence until we reached the main hall of the mosque. All of this time, the other shadowy figures were standing there watching me, and once I was in the middle of the room, they all started chanting in unison, "He is one of us now. He is one of us now." Then they all bowed their heads and turned to face the wall, and the man in the imam's robe spoke again. "Brothers, we have waited for him for a long time. Brothers, please forgive me for leaving you alone in our time of need, but I promise I will never leave your side again. Together, we will bring light back into this world." Then he turned to me and said, "You are our new imam now. You must lead us." Before I could respond, he disappeared, and so did all the shadowy figures. And that's when I woke up. So yeah, that's the story. Basically, I find myself trapped in an abandoned mosque in the middle of the night with a crazy guy and his undead congregation, and I'm supposed to lead them in prayer or something. If you enjoyed this scary story, make sure to check out more content. Also, if you want to submit a story, check out the submission guidelines in the description. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching.